Hey there, guys. Welcome to Robidoux Row's live stream here today on the 6th of August. Today we're talking about a very interesting character in St. Joseph in American history. This person, if you would Wikipedia them, which I hope you do so you can see this, basically treats them like they're a cliff note in history. That they have very little stuff to supply to our history, but then if you dig a little deeper, which is why we do these videos for you guys, you find that she's got a little more to her story than just she was a failed actress who came from China and moved to the United States. And so today we're talking about Miss Olive Young. Olive Young was born in St. Joseph in supposedly 1903. There is some argument over that, I believe, what we've heard. And Brooke, I know you've read a little bit more into some of her history.
Yeah, there was a lot of debate on her actual age, and that will come into play later on in her life story with some legalities. Also, she was considered two different people in one of the U.S. Census in Kansas City and in Missouri. And she went by three different names throughout her life that we know of. One being Georgia, and her first name's actually Olive. And then she went by Olive L.Y. For a while. So she's also done a little bit of fibbing. At one point in time, she told a fib about how she was actually born in Hawaii to help her career. She also made a fib about where her mother was from. This was during a time when you had to file with customs to travel anywhere. The standard passport was a thing, was it not?
To an extent.
Okay.
I mean, because she was a Chinese American, and her mother was supposedly purebred, born Chinese, she would have to file anytime she wanted to travel in and out of the country. So there's multiple letters that we found that talked about her traveling.
Yeah, we've been reading through transcripts of what the immigration officers would go through, just allowing her to travel. I know I was reading one, she went to Mexico for a few days, and it was just a small vacation. And it was, everything that you can think of to allow this woman access. Like, at one point, one of them, you had to have a witness there to verify who they were in order to cross into Mexico in the 30s. Yeah.
So that's a little about Olive Young, but we're going to dig a little into her history. So Olive was born to a man who was a doctor. He was
Mon Few Young.
Yes. He was a doctor of what we would now call holistic medicine. Chinese
herbal medicine remedies was what he specialized in.
And so we're going to put up a couple pictures of some of his advertisements. Like we said, you have to remember the era that we're talking about here. He would specialize in basically telling you that if you had something wrong with your stomach or your body or any other part of your body, other than incurable diseases, which you can see there on the left side, he would be able to help you. That he would use herbs and vegetables and roots that were imported from China to make you better.
Oh, by the way, this is basically around the year of 1900. The pictures you see up on your screen are dated to 1908 and 1906. Daniel was able to find these two advertisements in the Kansas City Star during that time frame. He actually lived in Kansas City, but during his daughter's upbringing, he did live in St. Joe, and so he was a man that would widely use the newspapers, St. Joseph including, to advertise his skills.
Yep.
Yeah, as a doctor. Yeah. And Daniel pointed out, I don't know if you can read this advertising on the left very well, but at the end it says,
no incurable diseases taken at all.
Yeah.
So if you couldn't be cured, he didn't want you in his building.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was pretty funny.
And so obviously her father was a doctor, and they did move around some. We do have read that she was moved to Hong Kong for a while as a child, and then they came back and lived in Kansas City and San Francisco and kind of moved all around.
Yeah, she went to school, and then she ended up apparently going to school in San Francisco, and then Excelsior Springs, Missouri, was also highlighted before entering a Christian college in Excelsior officially. Yeah.
And then so around the age of, and we're going to put this in big quotes, 16.
16 going on 17.
Yes. Which, if her actual birthday was correct, she actually was 17. There's a little bit of a story that occurred with a young man named Mr. Lehman.
Yeah.
Brooke, would you please tell the story of Mr. Lehman and Olive Young?
Yeah, so apparently they got married, they got hitched, and so the dad, Dr. M.F. Young, Mon Fu Young, he gets pretty ticked off, and he gets her back. This is the short version of the story, which we will elaborate on. And he actually gets this man into some trouble. There was a White Slave Traffic Act in the 1920s, 1930s at that time, which essentially was a law against slave trafficking, which was what the father thought that this husband-to-be was, what their motivation was. So it was a federal law that passed in 1910, and the whole purpose of it was that it was a felony to engage in the transport of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any immoral purpose. So, Daniel,
yeah, so
how did this go?
So basically the dad is convinced that this guy kidnaps his daughter.
Yeah.
And so he actually put out a reward for her return.
How much?
$50, which is obviously a lot more now.
Mm-hmm.
It ends up she gets him being found, saying that she got married.
Yeah, and there in the Kansas City Star, there was an actual article that they published that titled "Chinese Girl Still Missing." So she became somewhat of a public figure at this point. It was a missing persons on alert. She was the Amber Alert of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they end up finding her, and then she claims that she married this gentleman named Mr. Lehman, Lehman. And Mr. Lehman then gets picked up by federal authorities for breaking the Man's Act. And so after they pick him up, they ask him what occurred. He goes on to claim that he and Olive had been in love and that they were trying out being a married couple in Topeka.
So that means actually being under the same roof overnight?
I would assume so. He said they did it for 6 days.
Yeah.
Didn't like it. And so he dropped her off in Kansas City and left her behind.
So the quote in the newspaper, because this whole thing played out like The Young and the Restless, the more we dived into her story, the more crazy it gets. So this whole thing, her life gets placed on blast. So basically, and I quote in the newspaper, he says, "We decided to try it out for a while before we were married. So when we went to Topeka, we lived together for 6 days. Then we returned to Kansas City and separated." So it didn't go well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then her dad decides this is never happening again, so he sends her to private school in Salt Lake City immediately.
Oh, by the way, Olive Young gives this guy a $500 ring.
Yep.
No longer to be found, which was a pretty good chunk of change.
Oh, yeah.
Like, where did she get this money? Like, that's not easy money,
yeah.
you know?
So eventually, apparently, that ring gets returned,
Yeah.
We don't know what happened to Mr. Lemon. There's not really any records we can find of a court case against him. But then she ended up in Salt Lake City and going to college in a private school, and then ends up going on to being told by her father she should become a doctor and refusing, moving to China, to the Shanghai Canton region, and becomes a movie actress.
And she was very successful.
Yes, exactly. So she not only became a very affluent actress, known as Mary Pickford of China, which, if you know your film history, Mary Pickford was viewed as one of the supreme actresses of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. She's actually one of the founders of the United Artists movement, which led to modern day film being the way it is today. And Olive Young was viewed as the Mary Pickford. She was the first girl/woman to be allowed to be a photographer and producer of a film in China. Along with that, she was the first woman in Chinese film history to kiss on screen.
Yeah.
Which, according to articles we read, led to a audible gasp in the theater of the people watching. They were shocked that anyone would kiss on screen.
Well, she told her father she wanted adventure, and that's exactly what her life was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so she was involved with about 10 to 15 films that we found listed. Unfortunately, all of the complete films, have disappeared.
Yeah, a lot of them were from Shanghai. There was a couple from Hollywood, California, and then Indonesia as well. But this was the silent film era, just to kind of give you a little bit of background. So we're talking not quite Flapper or...
We're talking Flapper era.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking the mid-1920s.
Yeah.
When you still had silent films. And people have to remember, when the talkies came to America, they didn't go everywhere else. In fact, there's times that we found articles about Olive coming back to the United States to find out about what these talkies were about, what these talking pictures were.
Talkies?
Yes, so talking pictures over silent film. And so she continued her career up until about 1933 or so. 1932, 1933. And then at that point, she decided to no longer be an actress, even though she was kind of the actress of the day. And at that point, she actually ended up getting married to a man named Mr. Lum. Mr. Lum, a lot of people believe she met him in high school, that he was actually from Kansas City. And this is actually where the story of her having an issue with where she lived came in. In 1940, she still owned land in New York. She was actually working at a hotel as a singer.
Oh, wow.
And so as Olive Young, she was put in the 1940 census in New York City. Well, Olive Lum, her husband's last name, also lived in a house in Kansas City and was also put in the census of 1940 in Kansas City with her husband. And so following her acting career, and like I said, if you look at Wikipedia, this seems like the end of her career. She kind of disappeared to nothing. She actually became a traveling performer. She was actually the centerpiece of quite a few productions. Apparently, she would travel and sing mash transitions of Chinese and American folk songs.
Wow.
In both Chinese and English. And so it was a lot of the articles we saw had this kind of insane story of how they'd rotate over each other and how it was amazing to hear her sing.
And the picture that you see right now is one of her leads in a Chinese film where she plays a butterfly harp. And this was from the Seattle Daily. She was notated all throughout the U.S., in the New York Times, in the Seattle, in the Kansas City Star, and of course St. Joseph's. So she was very national and international in her contribution to the film and entertainment industry.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So for a few years after she retired from filmmaking, She did travel around the country like we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
She actually performed for a couple of traveling circuses. And eventually she makes her way to New York City, where she's actually the primary singer at a club in New York City. And this is where everything kind of takes a turn for the darker. Though before that, we do have a bright light for her. In 1934, she was actually the keynote singer at the section known as the Streets of Shanghai at the Chicago World Fair.
Yeah.
So as you said, when we're talking about fame, she was one of the big names. They put her all over the stuff on the Chicago World Fair, which was a huge, huge location. And then so after her career, again, like I was saying, she ended up being a singer in New York City, and she basically collapsed in her dressing room after a performance at the theater she was performing at.
Yeah, the official cause was pneumonia, but she was getting ready to go on stage. Mm-hmm. Again, she was the singer of a nightclub at that time, and it was two conflicting. It was notable that she died at the age 40, but also it's been said that she died at 37. Either way, between the age of 37 and 40, because we don't know her exact age.
Exactly.
But it was unfortunate, and it was sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she passes away, and that was, obviously the end of Miss Young. Her husband did, though, live on till 2002, Mr. Lum.
Wow.
And so he lived on quite a bit longer. But that was just a little bit about Olive Young. Like I said, someone who, if you do a little research on her, you don't find a whole lot about her. She's kind of just, she was a Chinese actress who was the first to kiss on Chinese film. Doesn't seem like much of a story, doesn't seem like much of a life. But then when you dig a little deeper, you really do find that meaty story about how she was a famous singer, and she was the first producer of films in China to be a woman. Which, even in the United States, that was a rarity in the 1920s. And so the first thing to be in another country, that was even more rare. And so she was a fascinating character. But we want to tell you a little bit about her. And then, of course, here at the Row, we do want you guys to come by. We do have some great new exhibits. I know Brooke is just about done with a special exhibit on the Civil War we're working on. So you can check that out. And we did just finish up a great exhibit on the Platte Purchase for a little more detail, so you guys can learn a little bit more about what the Platte Purchase really was. So thanks for joining us here today. We do hope that you join us again next week. And of course, keep an eye on our Facebook page about the Steam to Steam, as well as definitely check out the Allied Arts about Steam to Steam coming up. We had about 2.5 weeks left until that great festival celebrating the bicentennial of Missouri's history. Thanks so much for joining us here today, and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.